I am here with the Jeff Beal, composer to many of our favorite films and TV shows. Jeff, welcome to WBGO.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
So, of course, you're here to talk about a new soundtrack.
Out now on Apple TV Plus. New movie stars Ethan Hawke and Ewan McGregor.
You are a veteran in this area of composition, especially thinking about how music syncs and tells stories alongside with, right, and in conversation with the visual. So can you talk to us about your creative storytelling process? How do you approach this? You've done so many projects and with different storylines. What's your creative process look like?
Well, it's really great to be back at a jazz station because this is where my musical journey started as a jazz trumpet player, as a young guy growing up in Northern California. And so really, for me, there was an interesting thing that happened when I started doing film in I guess it was in my late 20s. Because up to that point, I'd studied music, classical, but I played a lot of jazz. And for me, I look at being a film composer as very much like being a jazz musician in the sense that, it's all about listening to what's happening in the room, responding to everybody you're seeing, and really being a part of that world that's being created by the film. The storytelling part about it of it is just fascinating to me because I feel like every film has its own little unique world. Every character has their own things that interest me. So I guess it becomes personal. It has to be personal. That's kind of my process. It's almost like the way maybe a method actor works or something. Right. I try to identify with the emotional truth of whatever that character is, whether they're a likable person or an unlikable person. It doesn't really matter. I try to have the music be from the viewpoint of that character and get you into their world. I remember years ago, one of the first TV shows I did was Monk, starring Tony Shalhoub, and I just love that because it was a perfect example of somebody who's got this really sort of tragic flaw. He has OCD, right. But by nature of that sort of defect or disability, you would say, other stuff happens. And so it's almost like by going into the broken parts of who we are as humans, that's often where the truth comes out. Obviously, in the case of Monk, it was also a great source of comedic humor and physical comedy. But it was never that we were making fun of it. We were just sort of, in a way, it was like we were just celebrating the quirkiness of this guy, and there was a little bit of him and everybody in all of us, maybe, perhaps.
It sounds like you find your way into the characters through their humanity, which I imagine is a slightly humbling process, right?
Totally, and fascinating. People now know me best for my music from House of Cards, and that's a great example of a character that both Kevin Spacey and Robin Wright's characters were just these despicable politicians, and of course it was maybe it was more of a fiction show during the Obama years, which is when we started, than maybe during the Trump years, where politics got crueler and meaner, but at least on the surface for sure. And but the idea, I think, even with characters like that, I think there's something fascinating in the sense that the villains are always maybe the most interesting, or in a way, in going into those darker parts of the human experience for whatever reason, it seems to be a fascinating place. I think part of the reason is that within drama, we find catharsis in confronting the scary truths of the world outside us, and ultimately maybe something inside of ourselves as well. And I guess that's the humbling part that you were referring to.
Yeah, and I mean, being a creative person requires tremendous, I would say, courage and bravery, because you're always sorting through these things internally, and engaging with work and art, and then you have to then produce something from that, right? So you kind of go inside of yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I joke with my wife that I don't, well, she's my therapist too, so she's very good. But in a way, I always feel like it's so immersive and so all-consuming that you cannot really do it well without being a sort of having an examined psyche. I think that's, you have to be, there's an incredible amount of honesty, and I'm still learning this every day, but and I think the older you get, the better you get at it. I think I'm a better composer now at 59 than I was in my 30s. And when I say better, I mean qualify that with maybe wiser is a better way of saying it. Just the more life you live, the more you see of yourself and people, and the empathy. I think empathy is a quality which evolves over time, and as you understand more about the world around you and yourself, I think maybe that ability to have empathy, I think it has to, it's something you acquire, I think, through life experience.
No, that makes perfect sense. And, I think there's been a trend in writing as far as who you think of as, the villain or, antagonist or protagonist, where characters have become more complex, right? So that, sometimes there are villains who we actually love, right? Because they remind us of those things that we may struggle with or not telling anyone about, or, they have a backstory, right? So, I think what you're saying, it makes perfect sense.
That's beautiful. No, that was one of my favorite things about the way they wrote House of Cards, is that as horrible as these people were, there were always these little glimpses of humanity, and even within those characters, and that's like life. That's like people. People are complicated. It's not all black and white. I mean, it's easy to paint people that way, but humans are much more layered and subtle than that in a lot of ways.
Exactly. You worked on films and scripts and TV shows that we all know and love. Ugly Buddy. You mentioned House of Cards. My favorite, Blackfish. I know it's a throwback, but that film is still upsetting for me. Like it was a lot to take in a really profound story around activism in the environment and animals, etc. Other things that you've worked on. Those are my favorite. Carnival, the Putin interviews. Is there anything that these are really great scripts. You would agree. They're really powerful writing. Are there things you say no to? Like, what do you look for?
Well, it's funny because I often say, you can't pick your projects. The projects pick you at a certain point. I mean, it's the law of attraction. So, I very rarely I've occasionally said no, just feel like it's not a good fit. But I will say I feel like I've led a pretty charmed life in the sense that for whatever reason, people have come to me with really interesting stories, and I've been able to through my job as a composer, been able to tell really really fascinating stories. And I'm glad you mentioned Blackfish, because I've done a lot of documentaries over the last 5 to 10 years, and that's an area of filmmaking that is fascinating to me. I think it's one of the most creative ones. I'm actually just now starting on a documentary about the journalist Dan Rather that I'm really having fun with.
Oh my goodness. That's exciting. He's really fun on Twitter.
Isn't he? He's had a whole another third act of his life. I mean, it's incredible.
I just feel like
incredible.
He says all the things that all of us want to say. He has that platform, so he can say them much louder. It's really lovely to follow. My name is Jamar Wakefield, and I'm the digital content producer here at WBGO, and I'm here with composer Jeff Beal, Emmy Award-winning composer Jeff Beal, who has a new project. Lakeshore Records released Raymond and Ray, and Jeff, you were responsible for the soundtrack.
Yeah, I'm really glad I was able to do this film. As I mentioned before, I'm a jazz trumpet player. That's, if you hear me, you hear the music on House of Cards, for example, that's me playing trumpet. So this has always been my voice as a performer, but I don't put it in, obviously, every score I do. And this film, Raymond and Ray, was written and directed by Rodrigo Garcia. And Rodrigo sent me the script probably about 3 years ago. It was before COVID that he sent me the script, and I started reading this. And we hadn't worked together since Carnival, a long time, so I was really excited. I started reading through the script, and by about the third page, I realized that one of the main characters was a jazz trumpet player. And my heart leapt. I mean, it was like, I'd never had that. I've done films about artists. I mean, Jackson Pollock with Ed Harris was one of the early films I did that I just loved doing. I loved telling stories of artists, but here was this sort of tortured soul, this down on his luck guy with his half brother, and then keep reading on. About 50, 60 pages in, we get to the sort of climax of the film. And not only is a trumpet player, but there's a big scene where Raymond and his half-brother Ray, who is played by Ethan Hawke, are burying their father. And Ray pulls out his trumpet and plays a solo at his father's grave. So I got to perform that piece of music for the film, which was such a joy. And obviously, the character and what the character's journey, who the character is as a musician, sort of influenced a lot of the other music that was in the film. I would call it a jazzy score. There are some cues that are very much out of the jazz canon. There's some that are a little more out of the Satie, sort of European, early 20th century French school kind of piano stuff. But then there's a third part of the score, which is towards the end of the film, Ray actually goes into a jazz club. And after playing at the grave, this girl that he's kind of starting up a relationship with he hasn't played in public in a long time. And this idea that the trumpet as a device in the story is really a way of Ray connecting to his father and this sort of wound that has not been healed. So Ray is at a jazz club and this girl brings his trumpet to him, sort of nudging him and saying, you got to sit in, you got to face this demon, And so that was really fun too, because I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is that as a function of writing the score and playing the trumpet at the funeral, I also wrote the music that's played in the jazz club.
Yes.
Which was so fun because, this is, when you're a musician, this is always a pet peeve of yours. And I think it's gotten better over the years with certain films. But, when you see jazz in a movie, you want it to feel like the real deal, Yes. And so, that was fun. A separate, obviously before shooting, I went down to Richmond, Virginia, worked with a wonderful ensemble of players down there who helped me realize all that music. And they also appeared on screen in the film, which was really wonderful.
Well, the thing about jazz is that you can't fake it, right? So, I mean, if you want to be honest, right, you can't.
Yeah.
It has to appeal to all the senses that we know and love, and it has to be something someone can groove to. You can't fake it. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave it there. But
no, that's so true, and it's about honesty, isn't it? It's beautiful. And I love actors. I loved hanging out with. I've done a lot of films directed by actors. Obviously, I mentioned Ed Harris. I did one directed by Al Pacino, kind of about maybe more than 10 years ago, and it was fun just being on the set with them and seeing how they work. And good actors are very much they're good like good jazz musicians. They have to be completely honest, completely vulnerable, and in touch with their emotional expression of who they are as people. That's what moves you about an actor's performance, is that truth that comes through. And that's what we love when you hear a great jazz performance. It's coming right at you off the stage,
Exactly. And it meets you where you are, right? Reaches out and touches you, you might say. So I know the circus, one of the tracks on the soundtrack has received a lot of attention, and folks are really excited about it. So we'll love to talk to you about that. But I have two others that I'm interested in, particularly Cold as Ice and In After Hours.
Great choices. Circus is a beautiful scene in the movie. Raymond and Ray are digging their father's grave, and this was his father's last wish. And unbeknownst to them, two other guys show up who turn out to be other half brothers that his father had with another woman. They are also acrobats, and just to kind of amuse themselves and kill some time. And there's a young boy there who is actually a fifth half brother, who is only maybe 10 or 11 years old. And so they start, just to kill time, they start doing some of their routines, and it becomes this beautiful sort of, I would call it almost like a Fellini-esque montage. And the music is sort of lilting and joyful and very beautiful, a little bittersweet. But the thing I love about this scene in the movie is, you always think about a funeral as like a sad event, But, really life's not like that. A funeral is actually, of course it's sad, but it's also a time when people get together and invariably you start telling stories about the person you lost and you laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this little moment of levity and light that sort of comes in the midst of what is supposed to be a very, sad or morose time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that distinction around, the gathering to celebrate life. It's for the living, right? And so we have to find a way to still live and be alive and be together in those moments. Tell me about Cold as Ice and After Hours. These are two of my favorites, and I think our listeners will appreciate them deeply.
Yeah, this is a really wonderful performance by Ewan McGregor's character. The dad is sort of, it's a traditional funeral home, and I guess the dad wanted an open casket for the viewing before he's buried. And so Ewan is going in to see him, and I've never had this experience. Most of my parents are alive, but I can only imagine what it's like, going to see the body, the sort of empty shell of somebody. Right. That was your parent. In the case of Ewan's character and Ray's character, this was not a great relationship. His father was, hardly there for either of these men. And so he kind of walks up to the casket and starts talking to him. So it's full of this sense of sort of trepidation and strange emotional content of, I don't know how to describe this emotion with words. Words are escaping me, but musically, I sort of went to this sort of language, what I would call sort of like, it's almost like Thelonious Monk kind of piano stuff, where, Monk was a genius he didn't write chords in the traditional sense. He wrote really chords as a function of harmony. And so it's got that sort of bluesy, sort of cadence to it.
Yeah.
And then there's some strings that come in, and I had the strings, they oscillate between these two notes. And I just had them gliss when we recorded it. And it also gave it this sense of like almost a seasick feeling of, it's bluesy, but it's also a little strange and hopefully, I would call it haunting, hopefully, is I think the emotion I was going for with that one.
It feels like we're about to go on a ride, right? When I listened to it, I was like, okay, wherever we're going, I want to go there with you. That's how I felt. And then, of course, After Hours.
After Hours is the piece of music that is played in the club where Ethan's character finally decides to sit in with the band. So it's kind of like, it's written as, it's like the end of the night. Most people have left the club, and his almost girlfriend at the time pulls out his trumpet. It's like, okay, there's not too many people there. It's safe. You can probably get the courage to play. And so this was, I really wanted to write it. I wanted to write it. It's an original piece of music, but I wanted it to feel as if it was like an old standard in a way, as if it was something that maybe, like sort of the Billy Strayhorn, Duke Ellington style of like an old chestnut, a little bit mixed with a little bit of more of the harmonic language of maybe like a Herbie Hancock type of evolution, but that kind of like a cross between those two. It was all done live in the room, and later on in this week or next week, I'm actually going to post a video because I filmed myself recording this, which was fun. Oh. So yes. Eventually, if you keep following me on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you can find me, it's easy to find. A video of me performing the trumpet solo, and that one will pop up. In the film, it had a really cool story too, because we always knew it was going to be longer than we needed for the scene. Ethan picks up the trumpet and plays, and then we were going to cut away to the next scene. That's what you do in a movie. You don't stay on it forever. Right. And in the case of editing the film, we decided not to stay on Ethan hardly at all, because we'd already seen him play trumpet for 2.5 minutes at the gravesite. And really, what's dramatic about that scene is is him just sitting in the chair trying to get up the courage to play, which is I love the fact that when we tested the film, this was actually the audience's favorite scene, was just a shot of Ethan sitting in the chair, tying himself into knots. He doesn't say a word, but it's just an incredibly deep and painful scene to watch. And then he finally steps up and plays. But what happened in the editing is the next scene is him and his girlfriend leaving the club, and she's ready to have a relationship, and tragically Ethan is just his character is just so confused and messed up that he just can't handle it. So he lets her drive away, and then he has his second thought and chases after the car. So long story short, in the re-editing of the film and trying to get the music in the right sync, somehow the idea came around from, it wasn't even me, it was the editors, just to use the music of Ethan's trumpet solo, which of course we're not hearing because we've left the club, but we left that trumpet solo play over Ethan running. And so it was totally, it's what we broke all the rules of cinema, the sense that you're hearing him play, but he can't be playing because he's out on the street, but it doesn't matter. It's like,
right.
It's movie magic. So it's almost like, we broke the fourth wall, obviously, with this character and the music. So this is kind of like the ultimate breaking of that fourth wall, where the music he was playing in the club also becomes the music that's somehow resonating in his head as he's going down the street and trying to salvage some intimacy in his life.
Well, I think it's a series of beautiful creative choices that came together and work, in terms of human emotion and raw energy and anticipation, for the audiences, both sonically, but also visually. Beal. And we were talking about the soundtrack to Raymond and Ray. It's an Apple original film, and the soundtrack has been released on all streaming platforms. You mentioned briefly some jazz greats, who we might know. Who are your influences? Who do you listen to?
Being a trumpet player, I mean, when I was growing up, I think the first solo I ever transcribed was Cannonball Adderley's solo on Kinda Blue. Not on that song, but on the, I guess it's Freddie the Freeloader, that solo. But mostly trumpet players, of course, Miles. I didn't transcribe a lot of Miles, but I transcribed a ton of Clifford Brown. Way into Clifford Brown, and Woody Shaw, Freddie Hubbard, Chet Baker. Later on, I loved Chet's playing. Kenny Wheeler was another one of the trumpet players. I listen to a lot of piano players, and I enjoy a lot of pianists. Big fan of Keith Jarrett and Brad Meldau, and I already mentioned Herbie. Yes. I'm a pianist too, and I would have to use the air quotes when I call myself a pianist in the same sentence as those other amazing players. But I do play piano on my scores, and something about the jazz piano, it just feels like the ultimate compositional / improvisational vehicle. Like a great jazz pianist is also a great composer, because they're sitting at the full spectrum they're sitting at the keyboard. So a great jazz piano solo is kind of like a full meal, I think, of just genius and brilliance from any of those people.
Well, we agree with the full meal, and you were right up there with greats. You, Jeff Beal, you've created the soundtrack of many of our experiences without us even knowing it, right? So TV and film, it's because of you that probably we get goosebumps and we feel in sync with these characters. What do you think your legacy will be?
Well, when you're an artist, I think music is something that hopefully brings joy to people, and I think people become artists for maybe different reasons. Mm-hmm. For my motivation has always been to express is to give somebody an emotional experience as a fellow human being. I mean, it's actually very simple. So if my music lasts beyond my lifetime, which of course I'd love for that to happen, I think maybe it's going to happen at this point in my life. I guess it's safe to say it's going to happen.
I think it's safe.
And I would like for people to continue to have some sort of spiritual food from listening to the work, you know, have it feed their souls and make life in some way that have them have a little experience of something that is divine or transcendent. You know, that's what I listen to music for. The music that I love and I listen to, and music it's this language we share as humans that somehow it speaks to our brains and our minds and our souls in a way that no other artistic language really does. The other part of legacy I think I'd like to leave behind has nothing to do with my music, but it has to do with philanthropy, which I've become more increasingly aware of. And philanthropy and education, I would say, have become very engaged in this, which is something I didn't really see happening to my life. I mean, I think when you're a young artist, it's a very selfish journey, and it should be. That's the only way you can become excellent.
Right.
But, my wife and I endowed a film music program at my alma mater, Eastman School of Music, several years ago. And I love going back and teaching. I give a lot of master classes from time to time. You know, we live in New York City now, although I'm in LA right now, but we live in Manhattan. And so that's really fun. I've just been speaking to the folks at Juilliard. I might do a short section of the Juilliard extension, next year. And, just being able to sort of mentor and help young artists and sort of not just, as I heard someone say, send the elevator back down so that the next people below you get their chance too.
Right.
That's important to me because I had those opportunities as an artist, and I want to extend that to other people as best I can.
I love that you are thinking about, your long-term impact in the world. And how you can pay it forward. I think it's important for all of us to consider and reflect on as we age. And I don't necessarily mean in age, but as we age as artists and dive deeper into our creative endeavors. You've done it all. Is there anything left? What's your dream project that you haven't done yet?
There's a couple, and I have done a lot, and I'm very. My wife would say, "You're done. Just retire." No, I'm saying this half jokingly because she knows I can't stop. But I like being challenged. I don't like being comfortable. I love being scared, and I'm scared up to a point, obviously, artistically scared, challenged, and so. After many decades of being really happy writing for the screen, I've really sort of pivoted back to concert music and obviously performing. I've been playing a little more trumpet, which is really fun. But I had that opportunity already to play. I still love to play, and it gives me a lot of joy, and it's great to come back to that. But I definitely have some of my longer term goals now are actually to write more concert music. I definitely want to write an opera or two. That's something it's a natural extension of my storytelling side. I have a new classical recording that's out as of this year too, as well, called The Paperline Shack, which your listeners might enjoy hearing a completely different side of me that isn't jazz and isn't film music. It's a song cycle for soprano and orchestra.
Wow.
And I've done some commissions for the LA Master Chorale, and I'm speaking early stages, talking to an amazing African-American violinist by the name of Kelly Hall Tompkins. And she's New York-based, incredible musician. And we're at what I'd call the early stages of developing a violin concerto for her. I'm really excited about that because that's, for some reason, the violin concerto has just been haunting me. I've written a flute concerto, a clarinet concerto, and jazz bass concerto. But the violin is sort of like, it's kind of like the top of the pyramid. It's like, that's just, every composer needs to do a violin concerto. So I'm kind of really excited about that.
I love it. Beautiful. I studied with Anna DeVere Smith when I was in graduate school, and she always told us to scorch the earth with our creativity and with our art, And so when you said, something that scares you, I thought about that, because it's not that, it's not fight or flight. It's like, what's the next level? like, where can I go creatively? Where can I push myself? And what will I find when I get there? And what haven't I tapped into yet? So I understand that, and I love that for you. The film is Raymond and Ray. It is an Apple original film, and Jeff Beal had the pleasure and honor to compose the soundtrack, and it is now streaming on all platforms. Jeff Beal, thank you so much for spending time with WBGO today.
My pleasure, Jamera. It was really great speaking with you.
Likewise.